続きまして、発行
We will now have a panel discussion on awareness of issues and initiatives from issuers. The material can be found in your agenda or read the QR code on the screen and you'll be able to access the handouts. The moderator will be Mr. Eiichiro Adachi, a senior counselor of the Japan Research Institute. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Adachi from Japan Research Institute. I do not recognize myself as a green activist, but when it comes to transition overseas, especially Europe and China, I do feel that there's a gap between Japan and those regions, and I have written some regarding that topic, and perhaps that is why I was asked to be a moderator. We have the next 40 minutes to hear what mainly the issuers have to say. So let me introduce the panelists first. From your left, from the audience's left, from METI, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, Director for Climate Finance Policy, Mr. MINETO INOUE. Next, from JFE Steel Corporation, a fellow responsible for global environment, Mr. HIROYUKI TEZUKA. And lastly, to your far right, from JERA, Corporate Vice President, Managing Executive Officer, Director, CFO for Finance and Accounting, Mr. KAZUO SAKAIRI. Thank you very much, gentlemen. First, as we kick off the panel discussion, I would like to raise a few issues for this panel. May we have the slides up on the screen? So here are some descriptions of the issues that I would like to raise. In the first panel discussion, led by Kodaira-san, this was mentioned to some extent. So the issue of transition. For the challenge of transition, how should we be addressing that? Here in Japan, a roadmap is being formulated and developed. And based on this roadmap, carbon neutrality is going to be pursued and realized, and that will lead to increased competitiveness and innovation, we believe. And because of this, we are getting lots of inquiries from overseas. How should we look at the roadmap? What's the thinking behind a roadmap? We're getting such questions from overseas. And what I think is when we consider transition, industries and corporations have three missions. These are the perspectives or missions. This multi-perspective approach is very much what we need to be aware of. So number one, a mission to provide a stable supply of basic goods and services. That's what they produce and offer. And so they must be offered at affordable prices to support economic activities. And second, more so here in Japan perhaps, but they have a mission to protect employment, which is the foundation of people's livelihoods. And number three, a mission to achieve carbon neutrality. And this issue of climate change is set to threaten people's health, property, and lives, and therefore a mission to halt the climate crisis one way or the other. So these are the three missions of industries and corporations. As I said up front, Europe and China, as I engage in discussions with people in these regions, as I listen to what they have to say, depending on the country, the priorities may differ. The order of priorities, of course, is different from one country to another, one region to another, and that is why sometimes misunderstanding arises, or vagueness occurs. And so without elaborating too much on this, let me go on to the second slide, 3 objectives for this particular panel. So first of all, transition finance in Japan. So far, how has it been addressed? What kind of initiatives have taken place? So what are the circumstances leading up to the development of roadmaps? What are the characteristics of the roadmaps created? May I turn to Inoue-san of METI? Well, thank you, Inoue from METI. First, so this conference highlights the big topic of transition finance. I would like to deeply thank FinCity Tokyo and the other organizers for organizing this conference specific to this topic. If you could please move on to the next slide. In collaboration with FSA and MOE, METI has formulated basic guidelines for transition finance and model projects as well as roadmaps. So we have been active in addressing transition-related issues. So a sector-specific roadmap, technology roadmap for each sector, 7 sectors, and there are aviation as well as shipping by MLIT, 7 sectors by METI. There are 9 areas. And for automobile, we are discussing that we should include them. 7 include steel, chemistry, cement, paper, pulp, power, oil, and gas. And providing subsidies to support the cost of external institutions. 440 billion in 14 transactions we have provided subsidies to. Next slide, please. So about steel and some other sector, I would like to provide you with more details as to the roadmap. So firmness, direct reduction. There are 4 areas divided, and I think this is a roadmap that is common to other industry. So increasing efficiency and conserving energy, that is quite crucial. That can be done immediately, and so that's the message that. At blast furnace, hydrogen reduction that is necessary. And so that is the highlight of the roadmap. And next, you can see the graph. So in order to reduce CO2, this is the pathway for reducing CO2. So what we pay attention to is the national policy and Paris Agreement, as well as overseas scenarios and roadmaps. We are very much aware that we have to have a consistency with those. And so that is in the background of creating this kind of graph. So carbon neutrality by 2050 in stages, we are to achieve that. And so that is the vision. Next, please. So this is for power. So decarbonized power sources, transition, and power transmission grid. We have created roadmaps for that. So in stages, ammonia, hydrogen, co-firing, developing a technology for that, and ultimately deploying that. So that is the roadmap. Next, this is electricity power, and this is the image or vision of reducing emissions. As I said, so Paris Agreement consistent scenario, we're very much paying attention to that as we have formulated this reduction graph. Next slide, please. For this sector-specific technology roadmaps, these roadmaps cover 70% of the emissions, including automobile. If we include that soon, it will be 80%. And based on policy trends, in order to achieve carbon neutrality in 2050, for specific transition for each sector, the roadmap is shown in a chronological order. So its comprehensiveness, ambition, as well as effectiveness. From that perspective, I think as corporations look to formulate transition strategies and as financial institutions judge the eligibilities their borrowers' transition plans, these are used quite. These are quite actively used. That is the impression. Through this, in terms of transition financing amount, inclusive of model projects, it has grown to around 600 billion gradually. Next slide, please. With respect to sector-specific technology roadmaps, SBTI, Transition Pathway Initiative, TPI, together with such international efforts, and ICMA, science-based emission reduction pathways, to verify that our roadmaps are listed as a tool for this. Internationally, what Japan is doing is being evaluated quite highly. Regarding this sectoral technology roadmaps, advances in technologies and policy trends, based on that, we have to review this regularly, periodically. That is what is necessary. Experts in these respective areas and policy makers, in close collaboration with these participants, we would like to make this even more effective going forward. Thank you. Thank you very much. Japan's government policy, hand in hand with the corporation's efforts on transition finance. Corporations are about to embark on addressing transition finance. And from the issuer's point of view, let's turn to another panelist. There are two representatives engaged in model projects working on transition finance. SAKAIRI-san from JERA, please.
Thank you very much for that. I thank you for inviting me to this forum. As to why I am here, I'd like to explain that while I explain my company very briefly. I'd like to explain what JERA is. JERA was established by integrating all of the thermal power generation and fuel businesses of TEPCO and Chubu Electric Power Company, and is the entity responsible for the entire energy value chain from fuel upstream and procurement to transportation, trading, domestic and international power generation, and the power and the gas sales. That's slide 1. Next page. That's the kind of company we are. Although it's a new company that took its current form in April of 2019, it is the largest power generation company in Japan, responsible for approximately 30% of all power generation in Japan because of the merger of the two companies. And as shown in slide 2, due to the fact that it was established by taking over all of the thermal power businesses of Japan's two largest companies. Slide 3, please. In addition, as shown on slide 3, JERA procures around 37 million tons per year of LNG, one of the fuels required for power generation, from 16 countries around the world, which is also the largest in the world. JERA's mission is to provide cutting-edge solutions to the world's energy problems, and it aims to contribute to solving the energy problems facing Japan and the world, and to build a new energy supply model. As you may recall, last year, partly due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, electricity and gas companies around the world were competing for power generation fuel, resulting in high fuel prices and a global energy security crisis. JERA, as Japan's largest power generation company, recognized that it had a great responsibility to ensure a stable supply of electricity and worked hard to procure fuel by fully utilizing its global value chain and to prevent a blackout in Japan. On the other hand, as JERA's power generation is mainly thermal, the company also recognizes that the decarbonization and carbon neutrality through the reduction of CO2 emissions is a major challenge for JERA. And a little over 2 years ago, JERA became the first power generation company in Japan to announce a decarbonization strategy called JERA Zero Emission to 2050, which aims to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So based on this background, in 2022, in order to accelerate the decarbonization of our business last year, we implemented two types of transition finance in 2022. First, in May of 2022, the first transition bonds in the power sector, 5-year bonds, 12 billion, and 10-year bonds, 8 billion, were issued. On an annual basis, the status of fund appropriation and reports on the progress of the projects for which funds are to be used will be disclosed on the company's website. In addition, in August of 2022, last year, DBJ provided us with an unspecified transition-linked loan. And this is in line with our environmental commitment 2030, which sets a sustainable performance target of a 20% reduction of CO2 emissions intensity of our domestic power generation business in FY 2030 compared to the national thermal emission intensity. And the progress of SPT will be verified annually by an external organization and disclosed on the company's website. Needless to say, the purpose of using transition finance is to accelerate the development of decarbonization technologies, including the use of zero-emission fuels such as ammonia and hydrogen, which will require significant funding over the long term, and to develop a renewable energy to the maximum extent possible. Furthermore, through the use of transition finance, we intend to engage in a continuous dialogue with our stakeholders and inform them that we are making good progress in improving the environment through our ammonia co-firing and hydrogen co-firing initiatives and the development of renewable energies. And we disclose in a very transparent manner. That is what we're aiming at. And so we want to continue leveraging this going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So about JFE's initiatives, please, Mr. Tezuka.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be given this opportunity. Could we have the first slide? Inoue-san's deck included this page, which is the METI's. This is the METI's guideline, cover page of METI's guideline on transition finance, which was used in Inoue-san's document as well. We are part of the hard-to-abate sector. I think this talks about the reality of where we are. So at the summit of this mountain, you see the flag entitled 2050 Carbon Neutrality. So that is the summit towards which we are all climbing. And everyone tries to climb the mountain, but there are several diverse pathways. Some climbers, maybe you wouldn't call it mountain climbing, but they are using portable jet engines or drones in order to jump to the summit, all in one great leap. From the industrial perspective, renewable energy or EV, these are the sectors where they began with green technology to begin with when the sector was born. So they can frog leap to complete greenness. But what about chemicals, iron making, steel making, hard to abate sectors? We cannot go to the top in one step. There is no technology. We need to begin by, first of all, developing the technology that will enable to go to the summit step by step, slowly and steadily. And as you can see, these are the mountain climbers, and they try to take circumvented routes And there are people who take the long track, but on the far right, you see the mountain climbers that try to take the short route by jumping over the valley. But of course, this route is a high-risk, high-return route. So there are different diverse approaches which are all necessary. And in this context, we are sectors that need to reach the summit in the long run. And there are such sectors in existence. But it will take a long time. We have to eat, we have to drink water, or else we will die before we reach the summit. So, in this context, how can such hard-to-abate sectors be granted support until we reach the top? And I think that is the essential meaning of transition finance. Next page. And again, this page, similar one, was included in INOUE-san's deck. I copied and pasted. And at the top is the JFE Steel's 2024, 2030, 2015 milestones, short-term, mid-term, long-term targets. The shorter the term, the commitment is underlined with capital expenditure plans. But the long-term goal for 2050 would require various innovative technology. So our approach begins from developing such innovative technology. Then what would be our pathway on the top right? 2 years ago, METI announced a transition roadmap, and we copied the METI's roadmap for our sector. The pathway is not linear, especially until the 2030, it would be the transition period, and post-2030, we will enter into the innovation phase and implement such innovative technology. That's the profile, and the technologies that will be utilized are included in the bottom of the page, like hydrogen reduction technology. JFE Steel has made plans aligned with the government's plan as described on the bottom left. And this is our corporate roadmap. 2020s, 2030s, 2040s. What would be the commercialized technology to be actually put into practice? And in order to gradually move towards those milestones, how do we use the blue portion technology, like emissions reduction technology, and through practical approach, we would like to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Regarding some innovative technologies, since last fiscal year, Clean Innovation Fund of the government has been providing us with subsidies, and we have begun to conduct such technological development. The pink shaded portion describes such efforts, but one technology, if we make a bet on one single technology, we may lose everything we invest. So carbon recycle blast furnace, as indicated on the top, is very important. How we can develop such technology at the top, and at the bottom you see hydrogen-based iron making direct reduction, and this is the development of zero carbon iron steel making that would allow us to frog leap to carbon neutrality. So we're doing both, gradual and frog leaping. So based upon such roadmap, last year in January, fortunately, METI was very supportive. They selected our project as Climate Transition Finance Model Project. And we issued transition bond. And we were the first manufacturing company. 30 billion yen of transition bond issuance was announced. And in June last year, we successfully issued the bonds. And it proved to be very attractive and popular amongst investors. So for what will we use the proceeds? Of course, we will use the proceeds for R&D, but these are the main 3 areas, or main 4 areas, which will run in parallel, and we will be using the proceeds for these initiatives. And through communication with investors, we will apply funds. At the top is to maximize the short-term emissions reduction, improving efficiency and energy conservation. Secondly, the second arrow, for example, renewable project. Wind tower uses special steel, or EV uses high efficiency material, so eco products like such highly efficient steel plates. We invest into the development of materials that could be used for those products. And cash flow will be necessary, which will be deriving from development of ultra-innovative steel-making process. The cash flow from the second arrow will be used for the third arrow. And based upon such plans, we issued the transition bonds. 2030 is 30% against the base year of 2013. That's our target. And until we reach that target, a total of 1 trillion yen of funds will be required according to our estimate. So 30 billion transition bond issuance is only an entry point. So we need funds in a stable manner in the long run. We need patient capital to be investment, so we solicit the continued support of the investors.
Thank you very much. We're starting to fall behind the schedule, but in the remainder of time, I would like to raise a few questions and provide a summary before we end. So we just heard, but then on the other hand, financial institutions have fiduciary duty. So corporations, sectors, would they be able to reach the summit of the mountain? We will have to take a careful look at that. And let's have the slide back on again. What is often asked as a question is, in transition plan, how do you look at the future demand? Here in Japan, population is declining. So 2030, 2050, how should we assume the demand level, the overall volume in those years and lock in? When you develop a facility today, it will continue for the next 30 years, 50 years. And if that is the case, then the latest technology may have no room for adoption. For the corporation to reach the summit, would the company, would the corporation be able to continue to operate sustainably given the current status? So Sakairi-san, please.
Thank you very much. The question is a very difficult one to answer. I don't know whether I could answer that directly. Firstly, the reality is that Japan is the 5th largest emitter of CO2 in the world after China, the United States, India, and Russia. That's a fact. And due to the recent crisis over global warming, eyes on Japan are becoming increasingly severe year by year, and financial institutions and investors around the world, as Mr. INOUE has mentioned earlier, they're also taking a hard look at companies like ours that focus on thermal power generation, partly due to the issue of financed emissions. But Japan is an island country, and electricity cannot be supplied to and from other countries. And there are various restrictions in the development of renewable energy, and that in the first place, the renewable energy sources alone, which are greatly affected by weather conditions, cannot supply Japan's electricity. The renewable energy alone cannot cover all of our electricity demand. Therefore, we've discussed internally, and as I mentioned earlier, JERA's way of pursuing both a stable supply and decarbonization is to maintain the existing high-efficiency thermal power plants to ensure a stable supply of electricity while replacing the fuel for power generation with ammonia and hydrogen, which do not emit any carbon dioxide. The idea is to achieve decarbonization through this. These decarbonization efforts require huge investment and time. Perhaps you could not show the slide, but JERA plans capital investment of 1.4 trillion yen over the 4 years to 2025, of which approximately half, 650 billion, will be allocated to decarbonization-related activities, including renewable energy. And toward 2050, to achieve carbon neutrality, it is necessary to incorporate global innovation. In addition to the huge amount of money required for the development of large-scale renewable energy, large-scale production and cost reduction of hydrogen and ammonia, development of storage batteries, and promotion of CCUS. Renewable energy and hydrogen, ammonia, cost reduction, storage batteries, and CCUS. As a private company, we will be requiring a huge amount of funds, and we need to incorporate innovation throughout the world. The financial institutions, through financed emissions, through this concept as a private company, how to deal with the situation is a large issue indeed. 2 weeks ago, I attended the Davos conference and had the opportunity to exchange views with world leaders, investors, and financial institutions. Compared to 2-3 years ago, the atmosphere has changed. 2 years ago, there was no wind, and wind power did not function. And Russia invaded Ukraine last year, and so fossil fuels were such that there was a global struggle for fossil fuels. And prices went up to unprecedented levels. And that is why at Davos this time, energy security, redefining energy security, decoupling and sustainability and affordability were major themes in the discussions. I'm not saying all of the discussions, but in many of a large number of sessions, this was the main theme. In this context, the impression, as Mr. Tezuka mentioned earlier, the impression was that more world leaders understand that Japan and other Asian countries would follow a different path, and it's okay for countries to pursue different paths. I think there are more leaders who think in that way. And in a different session, what is often discussed, the stakeholder capitalism and stockholder capitalism, I was involved in this discussion, and it was a good opportunity for me to listen to these discussions from investors. For them to properly invest is important, and I gave me an occasion to think about these points. And to investors and to financial institutions, what is important when we ask them for money is what we're committed to toward the decarbonization, the progress that we're making, and not only what is going well. There are things that are very difficult in terms of progress. We need to be transparent about disclosing this and to explain about this. And also, to have funds provided in the end, I think would benefit investors and financial institutions, because they would have it back in the form of a return, and we need to make sure that this happens. And for those fund providers, we'd like to request that not just to focus on individual projects, but to look at the company or the nation's strategy. Whether there is steady progress being made is something that we ask investors and fund providers to consider in making the decision to provide funds. JERA is the largest CO2 emitting operating company in Japan. It's nothing to be proud about. So we would like you to look at the aspect that the effects of transitions efforts are significant. We hope that you will turn to this aspect as well in making the decision as to whether to provide funds. Since the realization of carbon neutrality in 2050 is truly a public-private challenge, it is important to realize that this is a win-win situation for all parties in the units of operating companies, financial institutions, investors, and even the nation or the state. Thank you very much.
Tezuka-san, I'm sure you have lots to say. If you could just summarize in a few words. Well, about lock-in.
Tunnel digging from the entry is using the existing assets and reducing gradually, but digging from the exit means frog leaping great leap to reduce to zero all at once. We're doing both. And talking about demand, 1.9 billion ton is the steel demand. All international organizations say that steel demand will be over 2 billion in 2030 because including developing world, there are countries, so many countries that still need infrastructure. The issue is whether you make the steel green or whether you use carbon, the function is the same. So when you say demand, are you talking about demand for green steel making, zero carbon, or low emitting steel making? How much will they occupy? Carbon neutrality or zero carbon steel making technology? Yes, we will develop such technology, but that would mean increased cost. So that premium will have to be paid by someone. So there has to be demand on society-wide basis for green steel material. And this is not doable just by steel companies. We need the participation of the governments and various stakeholders of the society, as well as the financial institutions. We all have to think together to create initial demand, midterm demand, and final demand that will be over 2 billion tons to make all that demand green. So that's the challenge.
時間も本当に押してまいりました。
Thank you very much. We're running out of time, but just a few words. Inoue-san, financed emission is being talked about in various forays. So METI is considering how to disclose financed emissions. So if you could please touch on that, please.
エミッションの指標そのも
So financed emission indicators are quite simple and important. But the question is how these indicators are being used. Well, over the short term, financial institutions, because they're preoccupied with finance emissions, they have this dilemma of the prisoner. And in order to push for transition, investments are necessary, but investments are being stalled because of their preoccupation on finance emissions. So in order to avoid this, we have created a private sector council. So how to calculate emission finance at GFANS. They're saying that segregation is necessary and reduction should be disclosed on finance emission and so forth. So inclusive of that, we would like to have discussions with financial institutions. So how should we be sharing that internationally, sending out a message to the international community? The first meeting of the council meeting has ended just a few days ago. And so based on the results, what can be disclosed, we would like to disclose in terms of financed emissions. So those of you who are interested, please visit METI's homepage website. Thank you. So it's almost time to close, but in order to promote transition finance, what is necessary? Just one key word. That is the homework given by the Secretariat. So we will look at each speaker's keyword and then Sakairi-san, please.
I've written this. This summarizes what I've mentioned earlier. In the United States, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, and so at the Davos, it was pretty much the focus of attention. There's some criticism against it as well. Japan's transition finance and the mechanism of that is different from this. It's a very advanced approach, I think, and so. For everyone, for including overseas, to be able to use this would be a good thing. And those who are involved, I think we'll see a win-win situation. And that is why I wrote what I did. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we have the slide up? As I said, we have begun to live up to the challenge, but of course, there are challenges that would render outcome in the short run, but there are challenges that would only render outcome in the long run. But we are beginning to make a challenge. So please develop an ecosystem that would make it possible for us to implement what we develop. And we need support on private public basis. Even if there is technology, even if we want to invest, it cannot be applicable unless there is a market to use that technology. And also utilizing technology will require enormous amount of zero emissions power source or hydrogen or CCUS. And that kind of ecosystem has to be well developed, or else the technology cannot become applicable. For the first time when there is such environment, 1.8 billion or 70 million, 80 million tons of demand just in Japan, such green steelmaking would become possible. So seamless and long-term support is necessary.
お願いいたします。
Inoue-san, please. Yes. With respect to transition financing, in recent years, I think international understanding and awareness has rapidly risen over the past few years. But still, there are concerns that transition finance could turn into stranded assets. There are still some investors who worry about that, and actually that may be happening in some instances. So, as I said earlier, reliability and the reality of a transition finance should be increased. And so enhancing reliability, that's my key phrase. And this is not unique to Japan. On a global basis, as we look to achieve carbon neutrality, I think increasing reliability and trust is quite crucial. Thank you. Well, then let me provide a final summary. So enhancing reliability, I think Inoue-san said that this is a universal issue. Well, I'm a technical panel member of ISO, and the question is there's always a dilemma whether we're going to look to the future or whether we're going to backcast. And the head of GFANZ, Mark Kearney, the former governor of BOE, he mentioned this. One of his statements is a tragedy of the horizon. So the tragedy of the timeline, because human beings have a tendency to focus on the short term, what's happening right now, and we have a tendency to try to kick the can down the road. So the tragedy of the global commons, because we do not pay enough attention to the long term, we end up ruining global commons. And overseas people, they tend to have a long-term perspective, looking at the future. Here in Japan, we tend to focus on the near term to start with what we can right now. And rather than criticizing that we are behind, but we say that we want other people to understand that we're making maximal efforts at what we can do. So I think we were able to hear comments representing the sentiments of Japan today, but how can they be received and understood? We have to think, and how can we make all of what we're doing universal? Is the next question, and that's where our capabilities will have to be brought to bear. And of course, we may, in part, will have to focus more on the long term as well. So those are some of the elements that we discussed today. I'm sorry for the poor time management. Sorry for falling behind, but with that, we would like to conclude this panel discussion. Once again, thank you very much for listening to our discussions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We ask you to kindly step down from the stage, the panelists, and to the moderator. Thank you very much indeed.